This is House Planning Help episode 119. Hi there, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build. I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. My personal goal is still to create an energy-efficient home before I turn 40 this August. And in this session, my guest is Harvey Fremlin, Managing Director of the Self Buil and Renovation Centre. We're going to be looking at sourcing materials. First, though, I wanted to share an extract from a book I'm reading at the moment. This is from Bill Bryson. It's got a lovely comic style most of the time. And it's The Road to Little Dribbling, which is his follow-up to Notes from a Small Island. And this section, he's reflecting on some of the things that have changed in England over the last couple of decades that he's lived here. And I'll pick it up here at this point. The most dismaying loss, I think, is of front gardens. People seem strangely intent on getting their cars as close to their living rooms as possible, and to that end have been ripping out their little front gardens and replacing them with service areas so that there is always a place for their cars and wheelie bins. I don't quite understand why they are permitted to do this, since nothing more obviously ruins a street. Not far from us is a street called Hurlington Gardens, which should really be called Hurlington Bin Storage Areas, since nearly every owner has removed any trace of attractiveness from in front of their houses. The absence of any feeling of aesthetic obligation to one's own street is perhaps the saddest change in Britain in my time here. Quite strong words. However, I would like to say, Bill, I am with you 100%. And it's often a frustration of mine that I wonder, am I being someone who's living in the past? Should we just embrace all change? But I'm not sure we should, particularly when I have this feeling that we've got to move more towards sustainable economy and living in a better way and things like this. And I'm sure you can witness it. I could tell you a couple of stories that have happened around our neck of the woods. We fortunately don't have any front garden for that to happen to, but we certainly have back garden. And one recent example was where a hedge was removed to put in a wooden fence. Really don't understand that. It does change the aesthetic. Why would you want that? And so it's little things like this. And that's why I thought I'd just mention this to you, because I racked my brains thinking there must be a way to try and reverse this, to change the thinking. I haven't come up with it yet. If you have any suggestions, let me know, please. Let's get to our featured interview. It's with Harvey Fremlin from the Self Buil and Renovation Centre. This is a place I really should have been to before now. I'm very pleased. Thank you, Harvey, for the tour around there. It's got an exhibition area. They offer advice, even training. You can book onto their courses and lots more, which we're going to find out about in today's episode. So our focus is sourcing materials, how you go about that, particularly if you want them to be sustainable materials. I started by asking Harvey to tell me a little bit about his background.
My name's Harvey. I'm the MD at the National Self Buil and Renovation Centre. I've worked here since January 2008, so about just over 8 years now. And I came to the centre having spent a sabbatical, if you like, of 6 months working on a construction site for my uncle's building firm. So I had some degree of empathy with the visitors coming to the centre and what they were going through with their own projects. Before that, I'd actually trained and then worked as a sort of failing actor for a few years. So it's a bit of a different career choice in my mid-20s. But yes, I've been here for about 8 years now.
You're talking to a failed radio presenter. Now, I think we're both hard on ourselves. I love what I'm doing now. It's a sort of natural progression. So where would we start then on this journey of sourcing materials?
Okay, so there's a few things to consider, and that's what we do at the centre really, is to get people to really think about why are they doing the self-build, what do they want to achieve from it, because I think that then will steer them in the right direction in terms of, are they going to choose the materials themselves? Are they happy to leave that to the local builder or a package company if they're going down that route? But we'll probably assume that for the purpose of this conversation, they're deciding that a number of the materials they are going to choose themselves. The first thing they've probably got to bear in mind is that they're not in the trade, and some merchants, if they're going to builders merchants, are more self-build friendly than others. So shop around. It's all about choice really. And if you are going into builders merchants, don't be afraid to big up your project. You know, talk about your total budget and what you might be spending, because the more you're going to be spending with them, the better discounts you're probably going to achieve. And that is a big thing that we've always talked about at the centre. I think some people, especially in the UK, are quite embarrassed to ask for discounted rates, but your local builder certainly won't be. He'll be pushing them as hard as he can, to get the best prices possible. So, you're going to be spending a fair amount of money on materials during your project. So don't be afraid to question some of the prices. We've heard stories where people have been buying various items in a merchant and then looking across at a builder and seeing they're actually paying about half the price that they are. So, the margins are there really. So don't be afraid to ask about the cost of the products in the first place.
This reminds me a little bit of a friend of mine telling me they're going to this fencing company and they didn't like going there because they felt that they were always told, you're not in the trade. So will they see us coming a mile off?
Some might, but they shouldn't do. I mean, if you're doing a new build or even a large-scale renovation, that's it's no small project, and there's an awful lot of materials that you are going to be buying, for that project. So you shouldn't be embarrassed about it. And actually, in this day and age, merchants should be glad of your business. Really, same with all manufacturers and suppliers; they'll all be glad to deal with you. We in the centre have got about 230 companies that are all keen to talk to self-builders because they know that you're going to be quite thorough in your research in terms of the type of product that you want to put into your home, and they're very keen. They wouldn't be here otherwise.
Are we always going to be going to a merchant, or is our shopping going to be across the board a variety of different places?
No, not necessarily just to a merchant. In fact, I think we're seeing more and more that manufacturers and suppliers are actually happy to deal directly with the consumer. So that's something that we've definitely seen a shift in over the years. And so what we find is actually when we have our own shows and events here, rather than just sending normal kind of sales people to come and talk to visitors, they're actually sending people with a bit of technical background and knowledge about the products, because our visitors actually really want to understand, why they might choose one product over another. What are the technical specifications of that, and what advantages is one product going to bring to their home over against another? So they're not talking about, or tell me how this system works and what it is. They're actually wanting to know how they can get the maximum performance from that system and what is absolutely right for their project.
It's not just about cost, performance. How many of these different sustainability, which is obviously a core part of what we're talking about today, how many different elements, or is this just a stupid question? Because of course it depends on the product.
Well, the big mantra that we have in the centre is fabric first. So it's really easy to get distracted by all of these shiny technologies and renewables, particularly with, government incentives like the feed-in tariff and the RHI. But the main thing, the number one thing, especially if you're at the early stages of planning your project, is to think fabric first. Get the fabric of the building right, because you can put in solar panels and heat pumps and underfloor heating, which is all great, and we are big advocates all of that. But if your energy is leaking out of the windows, the doors, the ceiling, the ground, sometimes it's totally pointless. So get the energy, the fabric, the envelope of the building right. And that's what a lot of our talks and our courses are based on, really, is just starting to think from that end rather than thinking about products first. Products follow afterwards. Is that message getting through now? Because it does seem everywhere I turn, it's just very happy for you to repeat it again, because I don't think we can hear this enough, really. No, I think it is, because energy bills are always going to keep going one way. We hear that gas, has dropped slightly, but if you look at the long term, for now, exactly. If you look at long term forecasts, the arrow is just going to keep going up the graph, higher and higher. And people, I think, are becoming really aware of it, and they're aware of their energy use and the efficiency of building. And I think it's one of the main drivers to why people are actually thinking about self-building in the first place, because we try not to bash the large housing developers too much, but they're not really driven by building the most energy efficient, well-performing buildings. They're driven by profit. Whereas for self-builders, they're trying to achieve something that's bespoke, it's unique to them, and actually that's the perfect opportunity to think about the energy performance of that home as well. So it's a little bit of a balancing act, isn't it, that we play? People generally want an energy efficient home, which is great. And we want that finished product, sometimes passive house, where we're going to have very, very low energy bills. But what does it mean in terms of that fabric when it comes to cost? Do we end up building something that actually isn't that sustainable, but it's achieving passive house? How does all this equate? I think things are moving quite quickly, actually, because passive, for example, has been a real niche, in the UK, certainly for many years. But people are understanding what passive means a bit more. And we're forever putting on courses and workshops about what the different systems are. And I'm still learning myself, to be honest, because it is changing. But as it becomes more popular, the costs inevitably will come down, when you're trying to build to that level. But it's not just cost, it's the quality as well. And I think for self-builders, as I said, they've got a much longer term view on building their homes. They're not necessarily just looking at the immediate cost of using a particular system or a particular technology. They're considering the payback periods and what the long-term benefits are of investing the money, up front in terms of choosing those, potentially slightly more expensive materials. But in the long-term lifespan of that home, there should be huge savings there.
At what stage of the build are we finalising these materials?
This really should come at a very early stage, really. This should be in the very early design of the building, really, because we talk about various routes that you can take when you're doing a self-build. So whether it's going to be self-project managed, or you're employing a professional PM, or you're going to an architect who's going to be coming up with drawings, or choosing a package company that might well have an architect within, in-house. Any of those routes, you need to really know very early on what kind of materials you're going to be using and why. It's almost too late to do it when your foundations are in and your walls are coming out of the ground. It's too late. So all of these thoughts really need to come in the very early design process.
Availability then, can we always get what we want?
It's a big consideration. It obviously depends from product to product, from manufacturer to manufacturer, really. One thing to consider, though, is when you are choosing materials, availability is key in terms of if you are expecting to get something within a week or two, and actually the lead time turns into 7, 8, 9 weeks, is that going to have an impact in terms of your whole build program? Are you going to have guys on site that are just stood around twiddling their thumbs because they're waiting for materials to arrive? So it is really important to be absolutely on top of availability. And I think if you're choosing to project manage your build, being absolutely on top of your build program and agreeing with manufacturers or merchants that when products are going to be delivered on site, that is absolutely key. The other thing to think about, of course, with availability is not just the lead times, but when those products are being delivered on site, have you made allowance for access onto your site as well? It depends whether you've dug the site up and you're doing your foundations, and it's very difficult for a lorry to then come on and deliver 20 pallets of blocks or bricks. So you need to always have in mind, where are you going to be during the stage of the build when that next batch of materials is going to be delivered? Does it mean that you're going to have to handball them up a narrow lane and up a slight slope to get to your property? So just bear that in mind when you're mapping out the delivery of your products as well.
And there are different times that these products can arrive. So is there ever a scenario when they're all there before the build even starts, or is that ludicrous? Why do you stagger it?
That's a good question. It can depend. I mean, the thing with these products is you've got to buy them as well, which means you've got to pay for them. So
very good point.
So it depends to a degree in terms of cash availability, cash flow for the project. So if you've got the money sat there and you can buy everything up front, great. But the other thing to think about is where you're going to store these. So if you've got bricks, blocks, insulation, which is bulky, lightweight but bulky stuff, where's it going to go? So in fact, the project that I was working on before I joined the centre was the complete demolition and rebuild of what was a grade 2 thatched cottage that burnt down. It just happened that it had a separate double garage on site, which they decided to keep into almost the very end of the project, and that just became the storage area. So we could keep the insulation dry, which is another key consideration because it does tend to rain in this country quite a lot. So it's all very well having all your products on site, but are you going to be able to look after it until you need it? Is your site secure as well? If you are going to have a lot of products on site, you're going to need to make sure you've got not only adequate fencing, which you would need for insurance purposes anyway on site, but also probably you'd want to link that to an alarm system as well. So there's all those considerations. So if you can actually arrange for the products to arrive almost in a just-in-time scenario, so a day or two before you actually need them, it takes away an awful lot of headaches.
You mentioned security there. That's actually something that we've never talked about before. So who would we go to for that? Or is this a service that we might expect our merchant to organise?
Merchants can certainly supply things like Harris fencing, for example, and those kind of large metal fencing panels. One thing most people would need to have on any site is site insurance and warranties, and that will specify how secure the site needs to be done. But there are a number of companies that offer enhanced security services, be that just a very simple alarm system. Sometimes it can, if the alarm's triggered off overnight, they'll just send you a text message so you're aware of it if you're not living on site or near site. Yeah, a simple kind of web search really, or visit the centre and you can see a number of companies that will offer that service.
I know you mentioned specification, and this is obviously a rabbit hole that we can go down because all of these things will vary. How are we comparing like for like then on our products?
Well, again, it's individual choice ultimately. Really, so at the centre, say with doors and windows, we've got a number of companies that offer a really vast range of different doors and windows. And ultimately, it comes down to your individual preference in terms of style and how those products look, but also how they perform. So it really is down to you to do your research and to talk to those companies, to read through the brochures, compare performance of one product over another. Then availability might be in your thoughts there, because if there's one that you particularly like, but the lead time's months rather than weeks and you need it quicker, that might make your decision for you. And again, obviously the cost of those products varies dramatically, really. So you've got to make sure that it fits within your budget. So there's a lot of decisions to be made, but there's a huge amount of choice there as well for people, really. So it's not something to be afraid of in terms of specifying. You do need to make sure that the products comply with the planning consent that you've been granted, though. So if you've got a Grade 2 listed property and you're choosing modern Scandinavian style windows with perhaps timber on the inside but aluminium clad, you've got to make sure that that's actually going to be agreeable and allowable with your planning consent, because otherwise you'll be taking them back out again. So sometimes, depending on your local area, you might actually be restricted in terms of your choice and what products you're specifying. But obviously, ultimately, it comes down to individual preference, and particularly, whether it fits within the overall budget.
Here's another one. Sustainability then. If we're thinking about this, I know how difficult it is, particularly when companies almost try and leverage the power of words to make you think you're buying something sustainable. But is there anything practical we can do to try and make sure that our builds are as sustainable as possible?
Yeah, there's a huge amount of greenwash. You can look at any product, any company, and they'll convince you why they're green and eco. So it is a big thing. And we do probably more workshops and shows on all things green building than anything else, really, because it is high on people's agenda. It's going to come down to two things, I think, for most self-builders. And the question is, when you say you want to be green or you want to be sustainable, what do you actually mean? Is it because you really genuinely care about the climate and you're worried about the future of the planet? Or, being honest, is it because you're worried about energy consumption and bills, going up? And I think that's normally the two main drivers. Often it's a bit of both, but you need to be clear as to why you even want to be sustainable in the first place, really, and then look at some of the advantages of building that way. There are specialist merchants and companies that will only deal with sustainable products, but really it's for you to decide what you think really truly is green, and I don't think it's the centre's place to tell people one or the other, really. It depends on what your own thoughts are, but there are such a wave of products out available now which do allow you to build in a sustainable and environmentally conscious way. Various types of insulation, even through to different paints now which have far less, if none, of the chemicals that traditional paints have. So there's a huge range of products, because companies are becoming more and more aware that individuals are quite conscious about how they're building and the materials they're choosing to put into their house.
Is there an easy way to find out about all of these products, or do we need to go to each company separately?
I don't think there is an easy answer. I think you do have to do a bit of research, really. And actually, I think that's one of the fun things about doing a self-build is getting out there and discovering what is available to you. If there is an easy answer, then I think your choice is probably limited, because, you'll find companies that say, we can source all these products for you. But I think you really do need to go and do your research. Now, you can come to places like the Centre and listen to your podcast, or you can go online and read various magazines. There's tons of information out there. And I don't think anything actually beats just spending a bit of time and doing a bit of research. And again, it comes back to what's really important to you and your project, and what are the key drivers that when you think about why am I actually doing this in the first place. And I think that will influence your decisions.
Just as we get towards the end, I know you were saying to me before about VAT. So explain that one, because I'm not even sure I know how to phrase this into a question. But we want to be careful here, don't we?
Yeah, it is a complex one. So I won't go into too much detail, because you can find VAT specialists that will go into the real detail. But essentially, in the UK, if you're doing a self-build project, one of the great things is you can claim back the VAT, but you only have one opportunity to do that. So logically, most people will do that at the very end of their project. What that does mean is, in terms of your cash flow, when you are buying these products, just as we said at the beginning, you will be paying for the VAT, and you'll be funding that all the way through into the end when you get to finally claim the VAT back. And then there'll be a delay between putting the claim in and actually getting that check in the post. It's a really attractive incentive to doing a self-build, and can make all the difference between you almost achieving instant equity when you move into the build in terms of looking at the overall budget. But keep all your receipts. Absolute number one tip. Just keep all of your receipts carefully filed away, whether that be for products that you're buying, for traders that you're engaging with, throughout the whole journey of your project in one place, because you've only got one opportunity to make that claim.
And does that have to be when you complete the building? This is all based on the building, or is it when you complete the garage and get all the garden sorted?
Well, most people will do it at the very end of the project when they've actually moved in and they're living in the home. However, for some people, if budgets are tight and actually they need a bit of cash freed up to maybe do perhaps the landscaping or some of the final finishes, you can put it in the claim at any point. And so maybe that's an opportunity to get a kind of cash back incentive, if you like, which might just allow you some free cash to get the project finished. So it really depends on how you've budgeted and whether you've eaten into your contingency, during the stages of the project.
The courses that you run here then, why have you set them up as they are, and what are the key areas that you find people really want to learn about?
We talk to visitors all the time at the centre, and when they kind of get the bug for doing self-builds, you'll appreciate that yourself, Ben, I'm sure. So they may arrive at the centre having seen some of the TV programmes and they've got that moment of inspiration and they're really keen to take on a project, but very early stages. But then we see them come back again a few months later and their mindsets are changing. They're really starting to focus on some of the building systems that they're choosing which one to use for their project, some of the materials. And it's generally for people who just want to get that step more involved in their projects. We're not expecting them to be on site actually, pouring the concrete and the foundations and laying the bricks and blocks, although some do. But we do know that they want to be a bit more confident when they're talking to builders, when they're going into merchants and requesting materials. So our courses are really designed for first-time self-builders, although we do get people that have done several and still come back for more information, to give them confidence, to give them tons of information really and good advice. All of our course tutors are experienced self-builders in their own right. So they are talking from their own experience. They've learned from previous mistakes. And we also encourage people to kind of network and chat within the groups as well and share some of their own experiences as well. So it's really, by the time you've finished either one of our 1-day or 3-day courses, you'll leave the centre hopefully with much more confidence, certainly a lot more knowledge, and actually empowered to make the right choices and decisions during the journey of your project.
Well, I certainly know it's a tricky thing. I'm still underway and barely scratched the surface yet. Finally, then, I would like to know the core challenges that you find people have. You must meet a lot of people.
Yeah, it's been twofold really. For the last few years, since we've come out of the credit crunch and recession, certainly access to finance has been difficult for some people, although actually lenders are beginning to put more money, make more money available to self-builders. And there are a number of financial specialists. I mean, we work with a company called BuildStore who help people find the right financial products for their projects. But at the moment, I'd say the number one thing is probably access to land. So there are a number of plot finding websites out there. Nothing really beats going and talking to estate agents and doing a bit of on the ground research. It's particularly if you've identified a particular area that you want to build in, talk to local people, go into the local pub and have a pint and just inquire about any availability of land. And you never know, you might be pleasantly surprised. But availability of land has definitely been a challenge. The government I think really are taking note of that now. And we work with NAXPA, who are effectively the voice of the self-build suppliers and community, and really lobby the government in terms of removing some of the barriers to doing self-build. And that certainly has helped over the last few years. So we are seeing improvements, but if the government could do more, working with local authorities to make more land available, that would really help deal with the housing crisis that we certainly have in the UK today.
Harvey, I've enjoyed our chat. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben. Pleasure to meet you.
With each interview, we put together show notes, and for this session, you can find them at houseplanninghelp.com/119. You can review the key information from today's chat. Also, we'll link you across to the Self Build and Renovation Centre, compulsory to visit if you haven't already. And if you'd like to leave a comment or perhaps ask a question, you can do that at the bottom of the show notes. houseplanninghelp.com/119. We'll finish up on our hub update, and our latest module has slotted into place on insulation and air tightness. We also touch on the Passive House Standard because as we start to build up the hub, it makes sense to include some of that as well, and how you get a real quality finish. What are the factors that are going to make a difference? Also, you can check out another episode of the Long Barrow story. We're actually just building out of the ground now. Insulated concrete formwork. It's being slotted into place. It's actually quite a quick process once you've got all the foundations sorted out. So we see the basement rise upwards. And there's our Facebook group as well for our members, which is working quite nicely. It's great to see the caliber of people in there, everyone working on a project, all at different stages, and a really nice atmosphere of everyone trying to help each other, and good conversations going on in there. So very, very happy. If you haven't signed up already, please do this. We'd love to see you in there. houseplanninghelp.com/hub. It's £45 for the year. That price is going to go up very soon. Next time, Thomas Honor from Build Store is my guest, and we're going to be looking at borrowing money. How does all of that work? How much money can I have? Thanks for listening. We'll catch up soon. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.